Let's talk about what you can find inside the Figma menu bar. To the right, I have Figma open in a web browser, and to the left, I have Figma open inside of the Figma desktop app. And there are many benefits to running this inside of the app, and that starts with the menu screen. And in both of these windows, I'm going to open up a new file. And if you don't have any existing files, you can just click on New File. It doesn't matter what file you open up, I'm just going to show you the menu bar. So I'm going to double click on both of these to open them up. And first off with the menu bar, as you can see, we have File, Edit, View, History, Bookmarks, People, Window, Help. And this is the Chrome browser. But if I click on Figma, now you have things that are associated within Figma. Object, vector, text. And these tools come in really handy when you're designing with Figma. You can find these same menu options inside of the Chrome browser if you click in Chrome, click on this hamburger menu, and you have some of these same things. I'm going to discuss the menu items inside the Figma app, but if you are using Chrome or another web browser, you can follow along in this hamburger menu. Going from left to right here, we have File, and this is where you can start new projects or files. You can close and open tabs, and you can also save your projects as a .fig. Now, when you're usually editing projects, you don't have to save as you're editing because everything's live and on the browser. But if you want to save an offline instance to store or archive, you can click on the Save as Fig, or you can export different files in your project here. Within the Edit menu, we have the typical undo, redo, cut, copy, and paste. And we also have Paste in Place. And then some great tools that we have are Pick Color. So if there's already a color that you like inside of your project, you can choose this Pick Color and click anywhere within this canvas to choose that color. And any objects that you have selected will adopt that color. You can also set default styles for shapes that you're creating. So when I click on this rectangle tool and I just draw a rectangle here, the default style is this gray color. If I choose to have this black and I have a purple stroke, for example, and I choose the weight of the stroke to be 10 pixels, now I can click on this object, I can go to Edit and set default style, and now when I click on this rectangle again and draw a new rectangle, it's always going to adopt that same style that I set. Now there's also copy style and paste style. So again, if I draw these two rectangles here, I can set a style here of, let's change this back to white. And instead of changing this one back to white, I can click here, copy this style, and then click onto this object and paste the style here, and it'll adopt the same styles that I have set. You can also choose to select all, and that'll select everything within the canvas, which are just these two objects right now. You can select none. Or if I select this guy and go into Edit and select Inverse, this will select everything besides what I already have selected, which is this object here. Now there are also some great selection filters that are very powerful. So to illustrate this, I'm going to copy these two objects here, and I'm going to hold down Option and drag to duplicate these. And with these two objects, I'm going to change the fill. Let's change it to black again. And now with these objects, if I click one of these and go into Edit, I can select everything that has the same style. So if I click on this, it's going to select only these two objects. Or I can choose to select all just with the same fill. And that's also, again, going to be these two objects. And so you can see kind of what this is doing. You can select every element within your project that has the same text, and then you can quickly change that text throughout your project. Even if it's through 100 artboards or frames, you can change that text within seconds. These may sound like very simple options, but allows for powerful editing techniques. And lastly, if you want to add any emojis or symbols into your design, you can find those here. Now to show you some things inside of the View menu, first I have to create a frame, and we'll talk more about this later, but I just want to create one real quick to illustrate how the View menu works. Show Pixel Grid works if you enable this. It will show you the pixels themselves. If I zoom in holding down Command, you can see this little grid showing each individual pixel. So that comes in handy when you're trying to place your design on pixels. You can also show layout grids. So it's enabled right now, but we don't have a layout grid. So I'm going to just click plus, and you can see that that shows the grid, or you can hide this. There are other view options like show mask outlines. If you're masking some objects together, you can kind of show where those outline or bounding boxes are. You can show the rulers here, hide and show. You can show different panels, so you can toggle the layers panel on and off here, and you can toggle the entire user interface to show or hide. So everything's hidden in kind of a full screen view here. And then if you want to show just the outlines of your design, you can click on this and it hides everything else, the styling, and just shows you where the outlines are for your project. And now the pixel preview option, if you click on that, I'm going to zoom in to illustrate this. You can kind of see that everything looks sharp right here because it's vector. But if I rotate this, for example, you can see that it starts to get blurry, and that's because it's showing us a preview of what it will look like if this vector was displayed on these pixels on a device. You can also choose to show a transparency checkerboard, and pretty much what this does is if there's anything transparent inside of this frame or canvas, it'll create a checkerboard showing you that it's see-through. When you export it, it's going to be transparent. In this section, we have a few zoom controls, and next we can find the next artboard and it'll switch over to the right, or previous artboard will switch to the artboard over to the left. So if I click on this frame, for example, and I hold down Option to duplicate it, I have this frame selected. I can go into View and I can say I want to find the previous artboard, and it's going to jump to this one on the left. Next, we can just enter full screen, and it'll just zoom everything up to be front and center. And now we have the Object menu. So let's zoom out here so we can see both of these artboards. I can click on Object, and this is where you can group different selections or ungroup. You can frame a selection. So if I click on these two objects and choose Frame Selection, it will wrap your objects around a frame, and this is a little bit different than grouping, and I'll show you why in a future video. Now we have a few component options, and the great thing about components is that it allows you to reuse a symbol or a design throughout your entire project and to make quick changes very easily. I'm going to cover this in a lot more detail in a future video, but these options here will allow you to create a component, so it converts this frame into a component, as you can see here. And then here you can go to Master Component. Now, because we only have one master component here, if I copy this 500 times, let's say, I can select one of these copies. I can jump in here and select Go to Master Component, and it'll just jump to that master component so I can make those quick changes. Also, if I click on one of the child components and if I change the color or the stroke to be different than that master component, I can always click on this Reset Instance and it'll reset the style to what the master component is. Next, let's say you have a master component and a few child components. And one of the child components, you want to be able to edit the size and the stroke and everything, and you don't want it to be affected by the master component. You can always detach this and convert it back into a frame where it's not a component by detaching this from the master component. Now I know this all probably sounds really confusing right now, but don't worry because I'm going to cover this in a future video. This is the power of Figma with components and collaborative editing. And it's going to take a dedicated video in itself to really explain how this works. Now you have some other object settings, so you can resize an object to fit inside of a frame. And you can toggle some object clipping to clip and be masked behind another object or not. These options here allow you to bring objects back and forth in the layering scheme. And to show you that here, I'm just going to click on this object. I'm going to hold down Option, and I'm going to drag this to create a copy. And you can obviously see this layer is on top of this layer here. And so if I want to move this around in the Layers panel, I can click on Send to Back, and it'll send this to the very back. Or I can go to Object and bring forward, bring forward, bring forward. It'll bring that forward 3 times in the layering scheme. You have some quick flip options if you want to flip this horizontally or vertically. Some quick rotation options. You can also flatten selection. So you can see the selection also shows that it's rotated here. But if I click on Flatten Selection, for example, it's going to flatten this. And now I have selection handles that are parallel to my artboard. So the difference here, if I click on this other object, you can see the width is 150 pixels, and now because the selection handle is contained perpendicular to my frame, it shows the width is 175 pixels. And there are some great reasons why you would want to do that for some particular objects, but just know that you have that ability here. So I've zoomed into my canvas here, and now if I click on this rectangle, you can click on any rectangle you want inside of here, as long as it has a stroke. And now if I go into Object, and I click on this Outline Stroke, what that does is converts this stroke into an outline. So if I click on this, you can see now that I have this outline. So now when I double click inside of here, you can see that this isn't a stroke, but it's actually a shape that I can now manipulate the inside of the shape and the outside of the shape. And this comes in handy sometimes because now when I resize this, you can see that this stroke that I've converted to an outline actually resizes with it. Let's scroll down here and select this object now. We're going to go back into Object, and we have some Boolean options. And I'm going to talk about this in another video too, but essentially you can join some selections together. So if you have two rectangles, if you click on Union, it'll match those to be one shape. Or you can subtract one shape from another, like a cookie cutter method. And there are a few other options here to manipulate these multiple objects to combine into one shape. Now, if you ever want to duplicate any objects in place, you can hold down Command D, or you can click this duplicate selection in place, and then you can delete. Rasterize selection, if I click on this, this turns a vector shape into a rasterized graphic. So now this is an image. And if I resize this image, you can see the stroke gets skewed and things start to look a little bit weird here. And I can also click on this filled image option here and change things like the exposure, the contrast, saturation, and any other image editing options. Now clicking on this shape here, I'm going to go into Object, and you can show or hide a selection. So if I click on this to hide it, you can see that what that does is it toggles this little eyeball icon in the Layers panel to show and hide. You can also lock or unlock a selection so you don't accidentally change it. So this is hidden and locked, but I can show it and have it still be locked. So if I drag any rectangles, I'm never going to select that, and I won't be able to edit this accidentally. Again, this is just a toggle button to unlock and lock through here. And next you can select a few layers, then you can click on Hide Other Layers, and it'll hide everything that's not selected. Now if you ever want to quickly remove a fill or remove a stroke or swap the fill and stroke, these options are here. So now we have purple as the fill, black as the stroke, and we can just choose to remove the fill altogether. And now if I drag this over some of these objects, you can kind of see that the black is layered over it, but there's not any fill inside of there. Now to show you some items in the vector menu, what I'm going to do is just delete this frame here. I'm going to drag this over and just delete all the objects in here, so I just have one blank frame. And now this vector menu gives you some great options, so I'll show you kind of how these work. I'm going to click on the pen tool here, and I'll show you this tool in more detail a little bit later, but let's say we have some weird shape here, and I hit escape and say that I'm done. Well, what happens if we want to close this shape later? What I can do is double click on this object, and then I can choose this node here, and if I hold down Shift, I can select this node as well. And now if I jump into vector, I can join the selection, which will interpret and just create a solid line in between the two open paths. But now if I click Command Z or Control Z on Windows, I can go back into vector, and now I can say I want to smooth join the selection, which will interpret this and make the path really smooth. Another thing I may want to do is I can double click on this object again, and let's say I don't want this node inside of my selection here. So I can select this node again, go into vector, and delete and heal a selection. And that will delete this node, but it'll also try to retain a similar shape that that node was taking care of. Sometimes when you use fewer nodes inside of your vector icons, your curves become smoother and it feels more organic. So these three tools can be really powerful. Now let's click done here, and I'm going to just delete this shape. And just for illustration purposes, I'm going to add some text. We have a text box here. I'm going to increase the size here to 48 so we can see it. And now this text menu gives us some nice toggle, bold, italic, underline. We can convert text to its original case or uppercase or lowercase. Now this force read layout option isn't something that you're hardly ever going to use, if ever. This forces text objects in the selection to be laid out again if fonts you're using got updated. It just verifies that all the fonts are re-rendered to make sure they're using the latest version of that font. I've never used this yet, and I don't think you will either. Now to show you some features in the Arrange menu, I'm going to create a few objects here. So I'm just going to draw a few rectangles, and I'll hold down Option, just copy this. So we have 4 rectangles here. If we select all of these, we have some arrange options. We can round to pixels to make sure that the sizes of these aren't on subpixels, like 100.5 pixels. So this will round them to whole pixels in case that accident ever happens. And then you can arrange by aligning objects to the left I'm going to click Command Z here. You can also align to top, and you can also pack things. So packing things horizontally fits each object side by side, packing them tightly so there's no margin between those objects. Again, you can pack these vertically, and that will do the same thing, making sure that they fit nice and snug against each other vertically. And then you have some distribute options, so you can distribute horizontally, you can distribute to the top vertically, or distribute bottom. So these settings just help you arrange objects evenly or align them evenly with each other. You can find a lot of those same options here as well. Now under window, we have some basic controls like minimize this window, zoom it to fill the entire screen. You can also select previous and next tabs. Here we only have one tab open, but let's say you have 3 files open. You can jump back and forth between them with these options. Or you can bring all Figma windows to the front. Inside help, I really love this search inside the Mac help. So if I want to find a certain feature in one of these menu options, I can just type it in here like outline, and I can find this outline stroke option. Actually lives under object and right here. So you can quickly find the settings that you're looking for inside the menu bar. There's also some help and tutorial files, and this is where you'll sign out of Figma, or you can toggle developer tools on and off. I've never used these. It's basically just an inspector mode, just like you'll see in Chrome. So you'll get to see some of the HTML that makes up these objects here. But again, I've never used this, and I don't think you will either. So that's just a brief introduction of the menu items here. We're going to go over a lot more of these in much more detail. I know I went over them really fast. It's just to get you basically introduced to some of these things so that you know where you can find different options if you want to go out and design on your own and just play with it. But again, some of these options warrant a much more detailed video to explain, so I'll do that in future videos.